Hi, my name is Jackie, and the meme that I chose to discuss is the term weeaboo. In this presentation, I will be exploring the term weeaboo in its relation to internet culture surrounding topics like Japanophilia and Asian end up disrespecting the culture altogether. In addition to my own definition from the previous slide, according to Urban Dictionary, a weeaboo is a person who retains an unhealthy obsession with Japan and Japanese culture, typically ignoring or even shunning their own racial and cultural identity. Many weeaboos talk in butchered Japanese with the 8 or so words that they know. While weeaboos claim to love and support Japanese culture, counterintuitively, they tend to stereotype Japanese culture by how it appears in their favorite anime, which can be safely assumed to be offensive to the Japanese. I wanted to include this Urban Dictionary definition because, especially with the amount of overall collective attitude and undertone that the internet associates with the term weeaboo or weeb. Before fully delving into weeaboo territory, it is important to understand these two words relating to the origin of the term itself. The first one is Wapanese. Wapanese refers to a slur used to describe a white person who is obsessed with Japanese culture. This would include manga, hentai, and anime. This term was added to the online racial slur database in 2002. It's essentially a portmanteau of white people who want to be Japanese or wannabe Japanese. The other term is Japanophilia. Japanophilia is the obsession with things Japanese and the idea of Japan. Japanophilia is a long-lived term and goes who were just beginning to be introduced to European Western civilizations. These two words are related to the term weeaboo because there is a large notion of the Western gaze upon Eastern Asian pop culture in this meme today. So how exactly does somebody distinguish a weeaboo from somebody that isn't necessarily one? According to knowyourmeme.com, these are some behaviors that are telling. Weeaboos often consider anime or manga as a superior art form just because it's from Japan, and they automatically think that Japan and everything about it is superior to other countries for no conceivable reason other than, again, the fact that it's simply Japan. They oftentimes exclusively eat Japanese cuisine. They want to visit Japan, and when they get there are disappointed that it's not like the anime or the media that they consume online. This can even manifest into parts of personal lives, with watching excessive amounts of hentai and wanting to exclusively date Asian people. And they also learn Japanese poorly by watching anime, then slipping in the handful of words that they know into everyday conversation, even when their peers don't understand them. It's important to note that having a general interest in Japanese culture and going beyond surface-level aspects of pop culture, like interests in social, economic, technological, and culture affairs, doesn't make somebody a weeaboo. Watching anime and reading manga doesn't automatically equal weeaboo. Japanese cuisine, wanting to visit Japan, and being curious about learning the Japanese language also doesn't make somebody a weeaboo. The key factors in the problematic implications of being a weeaboo are rooted in this idea of unhealthy obsession, ignorance, and obnoxiousness. This meme first appeared online in the early 2000s on a website called 4chan. 4chan topics, and anime seems to be one of the most prevalent ones on there. So during this time, the usage of the term Wapanese became quite prevalent in online threads regarding anime and manga, and oftentimes in these threads there were manga fans and, quoting from knowyourmeme.com, those who were far less interested in their subcultures. Around mid-2005, the term Wapanese really began to peak in its online use. Because of this, 4chan moderators had to implement some sort of word filter to replace all instances of the word Wapanese on the website. Made by the Perry Bible Fellowship, and this is where the term weeaboo came from. So in this instance, although weeaboo was a totally made-up word carrying no actual significance, no connection to Japanese culture, the comic associates the word because of the connotations that this nonsensical word carried. The term weeaboo had replaced all instances of the term Wapanese. This trend chart shows how the words weeaboo, Wapanese, and Japanophile have really peaked in popularity over time. You can see that it really picked up around that whole 2005 era and really became popular around 2014-2015. So these are some memes that I found about weeaboos, and from a thread. It says, "To a Wapanese, a box of Pocky chocolate sticks is high cuisine from an alien planet that should be carried around prominently in the webbing of their rucksacks for all the world to see, rather than a cheap box of oversweet junk food." I found this one really funny because Pocky snacks that you can get. You can go to your local Target right now and buy yourself a box of Pocky for around $2. I feel like this is the equivalent of saying a Pop-Tart is absolute chef's kiss high cuisine. The fact that they use the term alien planet also alludes to this idea of the Western gaze or exoticism. I feel like this next meme really conveys this certain attitude of putting something like anime on such a pedestal, thinking that it's somehow the core of Japanese culture, to the point of putting people down that don't feel that same unhealthy obsession. This one really goes back to the idea of genuinely claiming to know about a certain culture, but not really knowing as much as one might think, because a genuine effort wasn't made to learn about the true culture and actual language, but was only fueled by this surface level fascination. This next one is a Pokemon card highlighting certain traits of weebs, like the awful, cringy attempts at using broken Japanese terms from anime, and of course, owning a body pillow with a waifu on it. A waifu is another joking internet term for a fictional anime girl that one has genuine feelings for, hence wife, but Japanese. And this last one is a WikiHow article, again showing this collective online attitude toward weeaboo sentiments. One of the issues with weeaboo behavior is that Japanese culture easily becomes watered down to simply anime and manga. Weeaboo behavior makes it seem like anime and manga are at the absolute core of Japanese culture. Thinking this way invalidates and disrespects the entirety of the actual culture, which spans far beyond anime and manga. There's also the issue of thinking and expressing the notion that Japan is the most superior country simply because it is Japan, and this assumption is often made without making an effort to learn true cultural histories. This conclusion is made using very little knowledge of the reality of Japanese culture and is ultimately problematic because it romanticizes the aura of the country altogether, including the not-so-pretty parts, like xenophobia, for example. And weeaboo behavior also creates identity culture and make it your own to the point of disregarding your own culture in the process. Speaking of identity, these name games or name generators used to go around the internet pretty frequently, and I came across them more in middle or early high school, but I still bump into them every so often. So essentially, this chart is used to take your actual name and generate a new identity for yourself according to whatever topic is presented. So for instance, I've seen charts like name or what's your DJ name. These two that I found, however, are what is your anime name and what is your Japanese name. I found them ultimately troubling because for each English letter are random East Asian sounding syllables. So the idea here is to see what random jumble of syllables you get to create a new name for yourself. And that name is supposed to sound somewhat like East Asian vernacular. It shows, similarly to how in the last slide Asian identity had been condensed to syllables for Western consumption, that in Western entertainment, Asian women have also been condensed to token stereotypes. I actually came across this quiz. It was sent to me in a group chat of a couple of non-Asian friends that I had, and they sent in the chat. They said to take the quiz so that we could all send our results in and talk about which type of stereotypical Asian we all were. They were even saying things like, "Oh, Jackie, you're totally the loyal Asian." And I don't know. It made me feel like they kind of missed the point of the whole quiz, which was the idea of tokenism in general. In this next slide, I included some close-ups of some of the questions and the different results or stereotypes that one could end up with in taking the quiz, such as the overachieving nerd, or the quiet mousy Asian, the Asian temptress, and the badass dragon lady. Jian Nishi, which is not even a Korean name, but instead a Chinese name. So there's a lot going on with the story, but I just wanted to bring it up as another example of these nuances in identity. So I just wanted to end this presentation by highlighting how the term weeaboo upholds these overarching themes of Asian fetishism and exoticism. By taking pop culture, in this case content like anime and manga, and using it as an expectation for real life, the individual perpetuates problematic notions like the objectification of Asian features and how this affects identity. We saw examples of this in the situations of dating exclusively Asian people for the way that they look rather than who they are as a person, and the example of literally changing one's race to obtain physical features from a certain ethnicity. The hypersexualization of Asian women is also ensued by associating the entirety of Asian women with traits depicted in anime girls such as submission, youthfulness, and being naive. So it's prevalent that in becoming what is defined as a weeaboo, the major issue at hand is that the individual is not only creating a false perception of a culture based on the fantastical, unrealistic media content that they consume online, but also using these distorted conclusions about the culture in a way that is offensive and off-putting. Thank you so much for watching my presentation.